It will never be over for those affected by the brutal death of 9-year-old Omari Varela in 2013. But in the courts, at least, it's winding to a close. We know a lot about the criminal prosecutions of his mom and dad, and his stepdad rather, but as an in-depth article by the Albuquerque Journal's Colleen Heald reveals, still a lot hidden when it comes to the wrongful death lawsuit filed by the young boy's estate against the New Mexico Children's Youth and Families Department. That settlement is secret. And Ed, can you see some benefit in not allowing the public to know how much the state settled for? Just a real simple question there.
Well, I mean, it was a sad case in our history, and I know there are a lot of things that we probably don't know that the judge is aware of. You know, the judge is following the statute and allows for there to be some secrecy when it comes to settlements. The question here is, the statute doesn't necessarily allow for extended secrecy,
right.
And the judge has come out with an order that says the total of the settlement will be sealed. And that's creating a question on many people in the legal community because that goes beyond what the statute requires. And so there's the concern there. You know, obviously it's with taxpayers' funds, and taxpayers would like to see transparency and know the totality, at least of the cost to taxpayers in this case.
That's right.
And the impact that it has on our overall
Lieutenant
system.
Governor, does that seem reasonable? I mean, that seems reasonable to me, that the public would be served of that situation.
Well, it does, but I will say that I think as a mom, and since her parents gave up any right to any of the settlement, but some of the siblings, and you just have to think about the element of people that they're dealing with. And if these kids are going to have access to, or there's going to be some money that's left to take care of them, that I have to think that the judge has to be thinking about how does she protect those siblings from predators who might come after them because all of a sudden they have some money. When we talk about taxpayers' money, I assume that I know that the risk management has a statute that they have to abide by, but also we have these liability insurances, and we pay for the insurance, but the insurance company ultimately pays the settlement cost, I think, after a while. But and I don't know really how curious the public is about the settlement. I mean, I think the curiosity lately has been driven mostly by what happened about some of the police lawsuits and the public servants who were getting these sealed settlements because of something that was going on with the administration.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of curiosity about that, but I'm not sure the public is as curious about a child who suffered what Omari Varela did.
That's a fair point. Dave, that makes sense to me. I hadn't really thought about that deeply. And
sure.
Yeah.
But the other question I think that we have to look at is what is the totality of all of these kinds of settlements statewide, you know? I mean, this is an individual case. The judge has wide latitude to decide. They're the judge. The question is, how much is the state of New Mexico? How much are individual municipalities? What is the overall number? Do we know that? I mean, you know, how many people sue municipalities or the state or the counties and
maybe
receive
CYFD
settlement?
individually.
Or CYFD.
In this case,
you know, and I think that would be a number that I think could sort of give us some hint, like, you know, government as a failure to protect children has a price tag. What is that overall price tag? I would be interested to know that number, and I think a lot of people would, as an indicator of, are we doing a good job taking care of these kids?
Well, the idea behind this, Senator, is to change behavior. You ding someone like this, you know, you change behavior. You know, but sealing does that goal get accomplished even though it's sealed? And the Lieutenant Governor makes an interesting point about who really honestly is dying to know this. But
well, I agree with that point. I don't think a lot of people are. The thing that I'm curious about is how, if the reason it was awarded was because of a failure in some kind of procedure or process or action by CYFD. At least that's where the case was.
Right.
So if we don't know why it was awarded, what actions are the ones that need the most improvement for the department?
I see.
So that, and then I also have some reservations about Ken Ortiz, the head of risk management. They have gone out of their way recently to make things more open, more transparent, more doing. And the very first rattle out of the box after he's made all these statements is the judge says, no, you're not. And so I think that puts him in a very, and risk management as a whole, in a very difficult position. Because I think the public does want to know how much money really are we spending on doing this? Same thing with Albuquerque or any other metropolitan community. We want to know, where's our money going?
Right. And we've just got a minute and a half or so here for this subject. Any sense of what this does to this idea of this 6-month period after a settlement is made? Is it, I mean, it's now like, it's not quite null and void, but does the legislature have to come back and take a look at this now that this situation has happened?
I think, yeah, the legislature really just has to take a look at that. The 6 month is sort of this cooling off period. Let's let everything settle. Let's not get the information out too soon. And, you know, as to your earlier question, you know, it was intended to protect certain individuals. And in this case, it was intended to protect the children involved in this case, or those who were recipients of some of this settlement. And so I think this legislature needs to take a step back and see whether 6 months is practical, or expand it, right? And what is the purpose? What was the legislative intent behind the statute is what needs to be looked into.
Exactly right. It's a quick round for us this time. In a moment, we'll look at the missing and murdered indigenous women's movement and New Mexico's big problem.